Hello, and welcome to today's Mind Your Career webinar program. My name is Sam Constance, and I work with the Alumni Career Development team here at the University of Chicago. Thank you for joining us today. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled Navigating the First 90 Days of a New Job. Our presenter, Hallie Crawford, has been a certified career coach and national career expert for 19 years. Her company, HallieCrawford.com, and team of coaches have helped thousands of people worldwide identify and transition into their dream career, effectively navigate their job search, and enhance their performance at work. Hallie is regularly featured as a career expert in the media, including US News, Forbes.com, The Wall Street Journal, CNN, and Fox Business News. For more information about her services, please visit www.HallieCrawford.com. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Hallie.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Sam, for that. Greatly appreciate it. And I feel like I'm on a game show here. I kind of appear out of the background, out of the dark. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. It is truly my pleasure to present on this topic that we are going to discuss, how to be effective in the first 90 days of a new job and navigate that effectively. As Sam said, I'm Hallie Crawford. I am a certified career coach, speaker, and author. My company is actually based in Atlanta, Georgia, and we have a team of coaches and resume writers and LinkedIn experts that really are trying to support everyone as much as we possibly can during what we know is a very difficult time for people. So we all wish you very good health, and we're happy to provide this information to you all today. Given that, we're all in different scenarios and situations, whether it's working from home, conducting a job search during this crazy time, lots of different things going on. Specifically today, obviously, we're going to be talking about how to start this new job that you have. Hopefully, either it's now or soon. And one of the things I did want to share with you all, if we just jump to this next slide here, really quickly, a couple of things just as an update on the crisis, the coronavirus crisis, is we are trying to provide, as I know the University of Chicago is trying to as well, which is great, provide as much support to people during this tough time as possible. So please know that on our website here, on our career blog, if you take a look at the top right here, we are adding a lot of new content as much as possible to that would be timely and relevant to the situation that we are in now. So please feel free to check that out, regardless of what scenario you're in, whether it's job search or completely different. Please check that out. Connect with me on LinkedIn too, because again, we're trying to pump out as much information to help people during this difficult time. The topic that we are going to be discussing today is something that we have worked with our clients on for over 19 years. I know I sound like I'm 12. I'm actually 47. I've got my 12-year-old son here who's, homeschooling, so to speak. That's been somewhat touch and go. Sam and I were discussing that a little bit earlier this week. But the tips and advice that we are going to give you all today are things that we have used with all of our clients over the past 19 years to assist them in getting started off on the right foot with their new jobs. And one of the other things that I did want to tell you, just to kind of put a positive note out there as well, is that people are still hiring. We know that a lot of people are in a difficult position these days and may have lost their jobs. But we do want you to know that I spoke with a client 2 weeks ago who started a new job right smack in the middle of this crisis. And so some of the things we're going to be talking about today will relate to her situation and examples of things that we gave her. But we've had clients get interviews, be contacted by recruiters. So we have found that there's a little bit of an ebb and flow here. It kind of varies a little bit week to week, and people aren't as quick to get back to people regarding, their new job or whatever it is. But please know there is hope, and there are people out there that are still hiring. Several of our clients are actually in Chicago, and they're moving forward with their job search process. So we just kind of want to let you know that we hope things will get back to normal soon, but there are places that are still hiring. So try to stay positive, okay? And this is a good time, as I know you all have considered and heard, to enhance those skills professionally. So let's dive into our content for today. So if you take a look at our agenda on this next slide, we are going to be talking about some of the common obstacles that we have seen our clients encounter when they are starting a new job, and some of the things that we don't want them to encounter and stumble on. Give you tips to get ahead when you're starting in this new position, and that we also want you to incorporate, by the way, into your long-term strategic career plan, okay? So the advice that we'll give you is obviously specifically to be successful in your new position, but ideally are things that you implement as well and continue over time too. And we want you to walk away today with some very specific action steps that you can take in order to be successful in your new position. If anyone would like a copy of the presentation, as well as you will already be receiving a copy of the recording, as Sam said, please don't hesitate to email us at admin@halliecrawford.com. We'd be happy to share that with you. Okay, so we are going to talk about the common obstacles first, and we want you to think about this, which obstacle most applies to you. Okay, so there's a lot of them here, which is why it's good that you're here today. So let's talk about some of these most common obstacles that we find with our clients. And by the way, if I look kind of back and forth here, I've got a split screen, so that's what's going on. Sometimes it's a little bit easier for me to read without my glasses this way. So some of the things that we want you to pay attention to in a new job that you need to make sure that you do effectively is you need to take this time to really observe and kind of learn about what's going on at the organization, within your department, and learn from your coworkers. We have found that our clients, sometimes they feel too much pressure, if you will, to like, oh, I have to perform. So they feel like they are glad that they hired me and I'm proving my worth. And that's an important thing to do, obviously, but you really need to take a good amount of time, at least like 30 days, not that you're not going to do anything within the first 30 days, but that you schedule and set aside a good amount of time to really observe what's going on, learn best practices for the organization, and learn from the key people that you need to get to know a little bit more, who have been around the block, so to speak, and understand, what has worked and what hasn't. Some people will try too hard to be liked and focus too much on, establishing relationships with people, which is, that part is actually a good thing, but they're not willing to maybe speak up or give their opinion on something because they're trying too hard to be liked, and you've got to be careful about that. We obviously don't want to make the third mistake of thinking that your way is the only way of doing things, okay? This is where, again, you want to understand the context and get the lay of the land about best practices. Don't assume either that you have to figure everything out really quickly and right away. Remember that your employer, they will be understanding that it takes a little bit of time to kind of get your sea legs a little bit, even if they're throwing you into the fire and expecting you to kind of sink or swim a little bit and learn. Give yourself some time and be patient with yourself to figure things out as quickly as possible, but within reason, because if you're putting that stress and pressure on yourself, then you're not going to perform as well, okay? Also, don't make the assumption that you have to work through all of your obstacles alone. We would definitely recommend you find some, peers, coworkers that can help you out a little bit and kind of lead the way and be a little bit of a guide for you. You can ask questions. We also recommend to people starting out in a new job that they need to actually communicate with others about what their strengths are and what their challenges might be. As well. So don't feel like you have to be perfect in every way, shape, or form in order, again, to prove that it was worth hiring you. But we want you to communicate with your coworkers, with your boss, et cetera, about, what you feel your strengths are and where you might need a little bit of help and guidance. And it's all about how you frame this out. You don't have to go in, and we don't recommend you going in and saying, this is a weakness, something I don't do as well with, but say, hey, I think I might be able to use a little bit of support in these areas, okay? That's a proactive way to ask for that. And finally, the last obstacle or mistake that a lot of people will make is not taking the time to really learn who the key players are related to your role. We can't take them to coffee or go to lunch with them these days. So instead, what we would recommend is one of the things you need to do as part of your first, 30, 60, 90-day plan in your new job is to say, okay, who are the 3 to 5 people that I really need to make sure I get to know, kind of get on my side a little bit and establish a really good rapport with, because they're going to be important to my success in the long run. So we really do want you to think about what some of these most common obstacles are for you. Your top 1 or 2 would be great so that you can identify these and start to write these down as part of your action plan, okay? So which obstacles apply to you, what your weak points would be. And what we would say, as I said, is about your top 2 obstacles. If you have 3 or more, that's fine, but we don't want you to go more than like, okay, here are my 5 obstacles. Go ahead and write those out on a piece of paper for us, or write them on your computer, and develop a plan to address these in your first 90 days. So for example, if one of them is you tend to not do as good of a job of getting to know people, perhaps because you're more introverted than extroverted, then you might want to say, okay, look, set a goal for yourself that I'm going to get to know 1 new person, or spend time, set up a video chat, quick coffee chat with someone every week for the first, 30 days, whatever it is, okay? So the good thing here in terms of identifying your obstacles, what we want you to do is we want you to build into your regular weekly schedule, especially during these times when we're starting and we're working from home so much. We need to kind of have more of a schedule and a structure than we would otherwise, because being in an office and just having, 9 to 5, whatever the hours are, kind of provides that automatic structure. When we don't have that, especially during these times, you want to overschedule yourself a little bit. You can always have wiggle room and, be flexible with it, but we want you to incorporate some of these possible obstacles that you might encounter into your regular daily and weekly schedule. So that is our first tip, to deal with these obstacles first. Tip number 2, after you've gotten those things out of the way and kind of identified where your weak spots might be in terms of starting a new job, understanding from past experience where you may have stumbled, is we really want you to take the time to earn respect of your employees, of your coworkers, by, again, learning from them. And so if we take a look at this first item on this slide here, what we mean by this is take the time and write down, have a document for yourself. What are the questions that I need to be asking and kind of that come up for you over time? Have a questions document that's organized on your desktop that you can write down, okay, these are the questions I'm encountering, because number 1, we don't want you to feel like you are peppering people with questions like all day, every day. It could be a really good idea, for example, to say with your supervisor, I'm going to ask them the questions that I need to ask like every other day or at the end of the week, whatever it is, and set up a time to chat with them about this. So you want to be the type of person, in addition to asking questions in the right way, that you're taking the time to listen to them. So err on the side at the very beginning of your new job of asking more questions, and thoughtful, thought-provoking questions as well. What we call these are powerful questions in coaching, where they're not yes or no, they're kind of open-ended, which shows that you're interested, willing to learn, and it generates more conversation and prompts the other person to kind of share a little bit more with you than you would have or they would otherwise. So these big open-ended questions are really good things to establish that rapport from people, to earn their respect, but also to help you learn what you need to learn. Be respectful of those people who have been there for a long time. Seek them out. Get their advice about, what works and what doesn't, any advice they might have about you starting in the new position, okay? So realize that in some cases, while the way things are done may be a little bit frustrating to you at the beginning and may not feel or seem like the best way to go about things, be respectful and try to understand the context of why things are done that way, so that you can understand, maybe you have a suggestion or advice, but maybe you can understand, okay, let's bring in these other kind of pieces of things that you've done in the past, because there's a reason why they do them that way. Ask questions first, like we said. Seek to understand first, then go to what your opinion or suggestion might be. And take time every day to get to know your coworkers and employees' strengths, their personality type, and values, okay? So on the very bottom of this slide, instead of saying take time every key, it should be every day. to take a little bit of time to get to know people in your new job, and specifically not just to get to know them like personally and their background, et cetera, but you really want to take time, and I'll also put in your questions document what their strengths are as well, what's important to them, and how do they communicate, so that you can understand better, and you're very thoughtful and proactive about understanding how to work with them effectively. Okay, so understanding what their strengths are, what their personality type is. Oh, this person seems more introverted than extroverted, so I don't want to overwhelm them with too many questions, for example, but also what their values and motivations are for being at that organization. That will help you really connect with them effectively, but also help you work with them more effectively, because you understand, or better understand, what their perspective is and where they're coming from in terms of how they approach their role, as well as what they're good at, so that when you need assistance or help, you can play to each person's strengths based on what that is. Tip number 3 on this next slide here is to find a mentor. And I don't mean find a mentor tomorrow. This can take a little bit of time, and that's fine. But start to put some feelers out there and to try to identify and think about who a possible mentor could be for you over time within this organization. This could be someone who's inside your organization or outside your organization. One of each could be really ideal. So having someone who has that insider knowledge and perspective for your organization would be great, because they have that value and advice to provide to you. But someone who's outside of your organization within your new industry or within your industry would be great too, because they can give you that more objective perspective. Okay, we would recommend, as you're, once you identify this mentor, setting up regular meetings with them in some way, shape, or form, like monthly. Video chat would be great, or phone call. We recommend, by the way, as you're getting to know people at the very beginning, err on the side of video chatting a little bit more, so that you guys can establish that connection a little bit more. And then, for example, if you need to save literally the bandwidth, because we do know that some of our clients, because everyone is working from home, their company is starting to get, the software is getting bogged down a little bit. It's okay to kind of move to phone after that. But set up these regular meetings with them, even if it's just for 10 minutes every month, and you've got your agenda with specific questions you want to ask them and advice you want to get. Ask for advice from them, and obviously be open to that feedback, and offer to help them in some ways as well. So if we could go ahead and launch this first poll here, that would be great. We're curious today to find out how many people on the call actually already have a mentor, okay? And Sam will launch that. And then Sam, if you could just read me the results once we get to that point, or you're ready to close them out, that would be great. I always have trouble finding where these are, and doing the technology and presenting can be a little bit confusing sometimes, for me at least. Plus I can't see, after 40, my eyes started going downhill. But in terms of finding a mentor, everyone, just kind of like keep your eye out for this. Maybe at the end of the first 90 days would be a good goal to set, to have identified a mentor at that point. It could be your boss. Maybe your company or organization has a formal mentorship program. There's lots of possibilities or opportunities there. So just keep an eye out at the beginning, though, because it can take some time to find this person. Sam, what have we got?
Thanks, Hallie. It looks like 71% of our respondents do not currently have a mentor, and 29 do.
Okay, all right. So the good news is that this is good advice for everyone, to just keep this in mind. And in my opinion, just by the way, it's better to take your time finding the right person than feel like, oh, I have to figure this out really quickly and not find the right person. So take your time with this one, but again, put those feelers out right away, okay? So tip number 4, to effectively navigate the first 90 days of your new job. And this goes for even during the COVID coronavirus crisis. Identify where we need to enhance your skill set. And in a way, if you are working from home and working remotely, this is a good time to start thinking about that. And are there ways that I can, take advantage of online learning during this time? So if you take a look at this next slide here, we really want you to identify and include coursework in your annual career plan. So even beyond the 90 days, okay, to enhance your qualifications, make sure that you're hitting the ground running here. And anything that you had identified, or maybe the hiring manager had identified during the course of your interview process, anything that kind of concerned you or them that you need to kind of beef up, this is a good time to start creating that list. So what I would suggest is your questions document that we talked about earlier, that you add different sections there to say, okay, these are the questions I have, and in this other section, and you may want to use Excel for this purpose if that tends to be easier for you for these kinds of lists. But you want to add, okay, what are the things that I need to be learning and getting better at? You may want to ask your boss or HR department for ideas about where you can, take a class, for example. There's lots of internet courses and certifications that we can get online. Lynda.com, just by the way, if any of you know of that, it's now LinkedIn Learning. It was purchased by LinkedIn. Coursera is a great one. One of my clients just referenced that yesterday. There could be industry-specific courses, so you may want to check out and leverage and look at industry association websites, because they will list sometimes their accredited or recommended coursework, or they may offer some of their own. You may want to check out online learning through local community college, for example. And some of the ways to get some ideas about this as well is to take a look at LinkedIn profiles of people who are either in higher level positions than you, if you're wanting to take a look to move up in the next couple of years, or at your peers. What qualifications or relevant education do they have? What do people tend to have that seems like it's popular and important? The other thing that you can do if you need ideas about coursework is you can conduct informational interviews with people either in higher level positions than you or peers again. And this is a great way to leverage your University of Chicago Alumni Association, is to find people to conduct informational interviews with. That's a great place to find those alum that you may want to chat with about, hey, how can I be successful long-term in my industry, start to network and make those connections. But you can also learn a little bit more about how to enhance your skill set, okay? Tip number 5 in your first 90 days obviously is a big one. And a lot of times this is the one that people do a lot and can turn into an obstacle, as we said before. So you want to make sure that you're taking initiative, but as we said earlier, in the right way, as part of this active listening, asking the right questions, everything else. So in terms of taking initiative, though, for this slide, is we want you to err on the side a little bit when you're first starting out of over-communicating, especially during this time when we're all working remotely and from home. We have told this actually to all of our clients, whether they're in the first 90 days of a new job or not, is because we don't have the opportunity to walk next door and talk to a coworker, et cetera, in some cases, we need to over-communicate a little bit more so that we are making sure we're explaining things to people effectively and providing the context to why we're asking a specific question or why we're sharing this specific advice. When you're brand new, people don't always know where you're coming from, right? Because they're just getting to know you. So err on the side, everyone, of over-communicating but providing context to why you're sharing something, why you're asking a specific question, so it doesn't come across in the wrong way, okay? The next thing that you want to do as part of taking initiative here is observe, even if it's through email or video chat or phone call, you can still do this. Observe and emulate and to understand like the key players within your organization so that you can kind of get the lay of the land in terms of the culture and what the soft skills are and what the key players or leaders, what they're like, so that you can start to understand what some of like the norms are within the organization, the soft skills are that you may need to develop, and things that you want to adopt kind of as part of your repertoire to be effective within the culture of this new organization. And as part of this one, in your same document that we talked about earlier, create a list of soft skills that you might need to improve as well. So for example, if people within this organization are seem to be great at, providing good feedback and asking for feedback, maybe that's something that you need to work on a little bit. In the previous slide, we talked about kind of hard skills, certifications, software, whatever you might need to use. This slide is more about the soft skills. So some of those things that you may need to improve upon based on what you see that most other people within the organization are good at. And then finally, you want to put yourself out there a little bit more so that you can be seen, especially because we're not in an office these days, not as much. So when you're working virtually remotely, you kind of have to raise your hand a little bit more to attend meetings. Speak up a little bit more in meetings so that people get to know you, because otherwise they won't be able to in that in-person kind of setting. So volunteer your time and advice a little bit as well so that you can put yourself out there and get noticed and start to establish your brand within the organization too. That's tip number 5. Let's go to tip number 6 here, and this is to be confident. When we are starting a new job, it is totally normal to feel a little bit intimidated and feel a little bit like, okay, I got to figure all of this out, especially if we're starting our new jobs working remotely. Remember, your attitude coming into this new job is critical. Our attitude impacts our actions, which in turn affects our outcome and how successful we're going to be and how much we can kind of hit the ground running. The majority of our clients, when we start out with them through coaching and we ask them, what is your biggest obstacle to your professional goal, whatever that is, whatever their goal is, they always say, 85% of the time at least, that they are their biggest obstacle to their success. So on your list as well, you want to identify upfront in this first 90 days where you feel a little bit less confident. Do you not feel as great about talking to clients yet, for example? And can you get some advice about what are the 2 or 3 things that I need to do to kind of improve that for myself? Are you less confident working on this specific, project that it relates to or requires some data analysis, or working within this team where you feel like they're overqualified or more qualified, I should say, than you are? Whatever that is, you want to identify upfront where you're kind of, I don't want to say weak spots, but where your challenges might be in areas that you feel less confident, because we want you to ask for help in those areas as needed. Take a class, read a book about those areas, develop affirmations, if you look at this slide, for what those are, because a lot of times we are our own worst enemy, and even though we're good at something, we may not feel as confident doing it. So develop some affirmations to help you boost your confidence, and watch your body language too. So in those situations where you feel less confident, pay attention to what your body language is. And if you need to sit up a little bit straighter, have your pen and paper ready to talk to that person, whatever it is, just pay attention to even how you can psych yourself up a little bit to have that conversation with someone if needed, okay? So notice those areas where you may be a little bit less confident and have a proactive plan to deal with those. Tip number 7 is to be a leader, and right out of the box. So as we said, we want you to kind of balance this with the proactive listening and asking questions, but pay attention to these skills also so that you can start to shine as well as a leader, especially when you're working from home, like we said. Think about if you are not as good at motivating others, if you are not as good at, for example, handling conflict effectively, or garnering feedback from others or handling it as well. If you're not as good with your emotional intelligence, most of us know what EI is. We highly recommend purchasing this emotional intelligence book to help you with those soft skills, if that's one of the areas that you feel like you're not as good. And as we said too, communicating your strengths and your needs. And I'm going to give you an example for this one because we talked about this one a little bit earlier. But if I give you this example, I think this is going to help really round this one out before we move on to the next tip here. So, for example, one of our clients, this was actually several years ago, and she's just a really great example. She was the type of person that realized over time that she is just very kind of calm under pressure. She doesn't, when there's stress and a deadline, she's not this run around with her hair on fire kind of person. She doesn't get, worked up and stressed out. And she realized through us coaching and talking about this that she had, sometimes people would make the assumption because of that she didn't care about the deadline or she didn't have a sense of urgency around her job. So she got a new job through working with us through coaching and, conducting an effective job search. And she realized as we were helping her prepare for this first 90 days, and we were talking through it, one of the things we recommended to her is to say, look, I think you need to explain this to your new supervisor. And she was high up. She's director level, so her supervisor was the CEO, but she wanted to communicate proactively to her and say, look, I just wanted you to know a couple of things. Like, these are my strengths, and these are some of the things that are actually strengths of mine, but sometimes get misinterpreted. I wanted to let you know is when we do have a deadline and we're under a lot of pressure to complete something, I'm not going to be the kind of person that freaks out automatically and gets worked up. I tend to, nose to the grindstone, and I handle things effectively, and I'm calm under pressure. And I didn't want you to misinterpret that in a different way. Really good to communicate what these different things are, what your strengths are, but also elements of your personality that you think are for other people are important for them to know in order for them to work with you more effectively, but also to understand who you are as a professional and how you are coming across. So from past experience, make a list of those things that you want to be proactive about communicating to them so that you're more effective and people aren't making any assumptions about you. The next thing you can do within this same tip in terms of your leadership strengths is we would encourage you right up front here in this first 90 days to take a look at this leadership wheel. This is from Development Dimensions International. It is a very highly regarded management consulting firm that has been around forever. And this is their top 10 leadership skills that they assert are most important in today's economy, okay? And we would recommend you printing this out and rate yourself in each one of these areas on a scale of 1 to 10. How good am I at each of these areas? And identify your top 3 areas for development. Because if you start to identify these now, these are things that you can begin to address and work on in this first 90 days so you can really hit the ground running. You can also get advice from a mentor or a coach on any of them as well. We did want to mention before we get to tip number 8 here, just really quickly, that especially during these times when so much is going on for people, we are very happy to offer a free career strategy session to anyone who feels like they need it, whether it's the topic that we're discussing today, if your situation you feel like is really unique and you need very specific advice, or if you need help with something else going on in your career, we'd be happy to do this strategy session with you. Complimentary, just email us at admin@halliecrawford.com, and I'd be happy to chat with you directly. All right, so tip number 8 is to be really proactive in your first 90 days as well about asking for and implementing constructive feedback. So one of the things that we would actually recommend to you all too is you want to set the stage as the type of person and professional that is interested in and open to feedback, that you want to learn, you want to understand why things are done the way that they're done, that you're open to being flexible and, changing and adjusting things as needed. So obviously, when someone gives us feedback, especially if it's unsolicited, because that can be much harder, obviously, and can make us defensive, that we want to demonstrate that we've got the correct response, that we don't dismiss the feedback completely. We don't blame the other person. We don't criticize the other person, even if it's just internally, but that we demonstrate that we're the type of person that will accept the feedback. Sure, you can filter through it. If you know some of it is inaccurate or just the wrong perspective and you need to talk to that person about it, that's great. But you want to accept that feedback, implement those changes, and make the improvements. Show and demonstrate that you will be willing and able to make adjustments as needed. Remember, obviously, like we said earlier, that your way isn't always the right way, and it may be better at the very beginning to kind of, keep your head down a little bit and give your advice later on once you've learned a little bit more, depending on the culture of your organization. And one of the things, though, that we did want to mention as part of this slide is you don't want to just show that, hey, I'm open to and good with accepting feedback, but I actually solicit it, and I would like to get that from people. So set up a regular kind of feedback system for yourselves that with your new supervisor, for example, you always ask them in the first 90 days with every one of your meetings, how are things going? Is there anything you're seeing that I need to change or adjust? What are the things you're seeing that I'm doing well? Like, ask for and solicit that feedback. And do the same with your coworkers. Set up a regular scheduled, as part of your regular meetings with them. Make sure that you incorporate this into that so that you're not just, passively, so to speak, accepting it when it comes up, but you demonstrate and show that you would like to have honest and direct communication with people, that you're open to feedback, and as part of that, you want them to, feel free to be honest and direct with you about the things that you need to change. And you will show them that you're open to doing this by actually soliciting it as well. Let's move to tip number 9 on this next slide here, is to establish these effective and really effective relationships. One of the good things about starting a new job is when we talk with our clients about managing conflict, establishing a team and creating a team charter in order to be really effective and create a really solid game plan for working together as a team effectively. One of the cool things is that this is a little bit easier to do in some ways when you're starting out in a new job, as you can start things out on the right foot versus backtracking, okay? So some of the things we want you to consider in order to establish really productive and effective work relationships are to communicate your strengths, not just with your supervisor, with the example that we said earlier, but also with your coworkers. Let them know in the right way, hey, this is something that I tend to really enjoy and I think I'm really good at. Do you mind if I take a stab at it? So let them know what you are good at up front so that you'll be called upon to do the right things and not the wrong things that you're not as good at. Ask for what you need along the way. Ask the questions that you need to ask. If you need help or assistance with something, don't be hesitant to ask someone, the right person, hey, could I ask your advice on this? Or would you mind kind of double checking these numbers just to be safe? I find for me that if I have just kind of a second pair of eyes, I just, make sure I got everything right here. Ask for what you need and don't hesitate to do that. One of the third things that we suggest you do is establish some ground rules for effective relationships. And what we mean by this is how often should we be meeting, especially during this new time here working from home? Can we do video chat at the beginning, please? I'm happy to move to phone after that. But if we could do our first 2 or 3 calls video chat, I would greatly appreciate it. Then I can feel like we're making that connection and I'm getting to know you a little bit. How does this person versus another person tend to prefer to communicate? Do you prefer email or do you prefer chatting about these things over the phone? Would you like an emailed agenda in advance of each of our meetings, or do you tend to go off the cuff, whatever it is? Talk with people about how to work with them effectively, not just diving into the work itself and, getting things done. Have a discussion with each person about, what's your preference for communication? How long should our meetings be? All of that, okay? As part of this, do this with your supervisor as well. Manage up. Ask them how they prefer that you communicate how things are going for you. Communicate about deadlines, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, we do recommend over time, this one can be a little bit lower on the list, and then we'll get to our second poll here in just a moment. Go ahead and, especially during these times of everything's online, update your LinkedIn profile, obviously with your new job, that shows you're proud of it, and get a little bit more involved on LinkedIn. Connect with your new coworkers, learn a little bit more about your new organization and industry by kind of perusing their LinkedIn profile and your coworkers' LinkedIn profiles a little bit too, just so you can get to know people a little bit more that way. We also recommend, especially if you're starting within a new industry with this new job, get involved with some LinkedIn industry-specific groups and participate in those so you can get your sea legs a little bit there, since we don't have the online or the in-person networking, I should say. So we're curious with our second poll here, if we could go ahead and launch that. That would be great. How many are currently active on LinkedIn? And I guess what I would say, to be more specific with this one, if you're checking it and doing something at least once a week, meaning you're posting something, you're responding to messages, you're checking it out, reading something online on LinkedIn, that'd be great if you could share that with us. I always have to have some water during these because I know I'm talking a lot and talking really quickly. So Sam, what have we got? Great. Thanks, everyone, for participating. Sam, can you share the results with me or verbally? I don't know if you're on mute, maybe. Okay, no worries. As long as you're sharing them on the screen, it's all good. But do let me know, everyone, if you can't hear me for any reason, please put something in the chat box. Just want to make sure that you can hear me. So being active on LinkedIn, establishing these effective relationships, really important thing in your first 90 days. One of the things, because our last tip here, tip number 10, is to create a plan. And it's a plan incorporating everything that we've talked about so far. But we also encourage you to use this as the basis of your strategic career plan annually and beyond, okay? And if anyone does not have a strategic career plan, feel free to email us at admin@halliecrawford.com. We'd be happy to give you a free template. This is the template that we use with our clients to help them develop what this proactive strategic career plan is, to help them be more successful. Have a plan for what education do I need to attain, what skills do I need to enhance and beef up, et cetera, okay? So tip number 10 is to create a plan based on everything we've talked about today. We want you to determine how you're going to address the obstacles like we talked about at the beginning. We would definitely recommend having a plan to find a mentor. What leadership strengths you need to improve, include any classes or training that you feel you need. And look, we're not saying that you have to complete a class within the first 90 days necessarily, but get something on the docket, several things on the docket for the first year. And establish goals for your first 30, 60, 90-day plan as well. We have had clients actually, just by the way, share their plan with their manager. We find that this is really impressive. It's a good way to get some feedback on what the plan is. It shows that you're not just being proactive, but to get some feedback and advice on, hey, am I on the right track? Is there anything you see that I need to change or adjust here? Great idea to do that if you feel comfortable doing so. And if you don't and you want to do it at the end of the 90 days, that's okay too. But having it be a collaborative effort, we highly recommend that, just by the way. So tip number 10 is to create a plan, write down what we've talked about. One of my bosses, the last boss that I had that was my full-time job before launching my coaching practice, she would always say it's not real unless it's in writing. All right, so we are going to get to our Q&A here in just a moment, everyone. And we'd like you to go ahead and get out your pen and paper, please, and go ahead and identify 2 action steps that you will take in the next week, whether it's I'm going to try out the Leadership Wheel assessment, I'm going to start to work on finding a mentor, identifying a class to take, or scheduling that complimentary strategy session, whatever works for you. Go ahead and write those down. Feel free to share them in the chat box if you would like to, too. And then let's go ahead and start to move towards our Q&A. We'll talk about coaching here in just a moment, and I will put up my contact information. If anyone would like to talk about coaching and our services further, I'd be happy to do so. Just so you know, you can email me at admin@halliecrawford.com. We'll send you a link to get you scheduled. But we do offer a quick complimentary phone call just to get a sense of what your needs are, how we can best help you if it's the right fit, and then go from there to determine if it is. One of the last things that I always like to share, and then we'll move to Q&A. So please go ahead and start entering your questions in the questions box if you have them, and we'll spend a few minutes answering those. This is the quote on this slide, though, here that always pushes me to do those things that I might not feel like doing, or that might feel like they're too far, stepping out of my comfort zone. Remember, the greatest risk in life is not taking one. I challenge you to push yourself to do these action steps that we talked about today, because as we all know, without risk, there's no reward. It will pay off dividends absolutely later on in the future. So let's go ahead and do our Q&A. And Sam, if you could go ahead and share any questions that come through, that would be fantastic. Please know, everyone, if you have questions that come up for you later on, even if it's weeks later, we would be happy to answer those via email. Just keep our email address on file and shoot us an email. We'd be happy to answer you that way as well.
Absolutely. Hallie, can you hear me? I just want to make sure my audio is working.
I can hear you
okay.
now. Yeah.
All right, so we've got one question here that reads, could you please share some advice on how to communicate or keep updating with a direct manager especially if they're overseas? What's a good frequency, and how do you handle that unique situation?
That's a great question. So it depends on the type of work that you're doing. So it depends a little bit on, for example, if you're doing very detailed work and the status can change like day to day, you're probably going to want to have an update with them at least once a week, maybe even twice a week. But if it's something where things are a little bit more, I don't want to say stagnant like in a bad way, but maybe every other week is enough. I would have a conversation with them about it to find out what sounds best, figure out if status updates like in a Google Doc that's shared so emails aren't flying around is better. I would recommend something like that too. But go to the table talking with them about like, look, I was thinking about giving you a quick weekly update. Does that work for you? So think about what might feel best for you and make you successful, but also for them as well, and then have a conversation about it. Great question.
Thank you. Here's another question. What are some of the good ways to identify the right mentor? Do you officially ask this person, or is it more of a mutual understanding?
Great question. So identifying a mentor, I would kind of feel out who, within the organization seems like they're interested in and, excited to help you out and just, friendly, that kind of thing. I would err on the side a little bit of being a little bit more formal and actually asking, hey, do you mind if we kind of, have an informal mentoring relationship? If I was able to ask you questions periodically and would love to take you to lunch once all of this blows over, like once a month or once every other month. Would you be open to something like that? So I would ask a little bit more formally, but know that if the other person would prefer it's more of an informal arrangement and you don't have like a set meeting every month, then you can be open to that as well, and it can slide into something that's a little bit more informal. But you kind of want to be up front. I think have your cards on the table so that you both know what you're agreeing to and it doesn't end up being awkward for you in any way. Great question. It's a good one.
And here's our next one. What do you suggest we do when our supervisor is too busy to meet with us often during our first 90 days, which can cause quite a bit of anxiety?
Yes, and this can happen a lot where they're just kind of, expecting you to dive in. So what I would do is a couple of things. Number one, if there is someone else that you can identify that you can get a little bit of feedback from or, advice from along the way, I would lean on them in addition to your supervisor. Find another way to kind of check in with your supervisor as well. Maybe if you find, for example, that they respond a little bit better to emails, you can say, hey, do you mind if I touch base with you once a week with all of my questions in one email? Is that a good way to get some of my questions answered? And just kind of ask them what might be best for them based on how tough their schedule may be. In my opinion, of course, it would be better to have at least some regular meetings. But maybe it's just that, I can only meet with you once a month, and you say, okay, so if that's the case, do you mind if I send you an email once a week to just kind of touch base and ask questions? And then you have that monthly meeting, for example, but you are really prepared with everything that you need to ask in terms of the priorities, and then maybe the rest of the items, you can find other ways to get those questions answered. Totally understand the anxiety. Do your best to kind of manage around it, and don't hesitate to ask coworkers too for their advice, because maybe they went through something similar and they've got some suggestions too. Great question.
Thank you. And here's our next one. So you talk about in your presentation how important it is to identify key players in the organization and develop relationships or mimic their experiences. But it seems to me that sometimes companies, especially international ones, I apologize. Sometimes in companies, it's difficult to navigate the hierarchy and to figure out who really is a key player. How do we do that?
So pay close attention to not just like your work tasks and the agenda items within meetings, but who seems to be talking a little bit more, for example, or command a little bit more presence or authority or whatever it is. So I understand that sometimes it can be a little bit harder to figure out. But what I have found with clients is if they do a little bit more of like their third level of listening and kind of paying a little bit more attention to, who seems to speak up more in meetings or who's sending out the emails or who seems to know all the answers, If you do that, kind of ear to the ground a little bit, or you can ask some of your coworkers as well, are there certain people that you might suggest that I make sure I get to know that just, seem to know everything or are good to go to for questions or advice? You can ask them also. And usually I do find that you're able to do it through those avenues instead.
Thank you. Our next question, do you have any tips for capturing your experience or the learning that you get from achieving a goal so that you don't forget it in years to come?
Yep. So remember, great question. So remember that document we talked about earlier that has questions, skills you want to brush up on, et cetera. We, in one of our webinars, when we talk about their people's strategic career plan, as well as updating their resume and LinkedIn and everything else, we have clients have an accomplishments document that lives on their desktop or somewhere real easy for them to access, even, accessible by their phone, for example, that they list all of their accomplishments and they remember or have a calendar item once a month to make sure that that's updated with, okay, what happened this month? What did I do well? What are the kudos I've gotten from clients or customers so far? You want to put everything in there, but just have one place where you can capture it all. And then when it's time for your performance review, to work on your strategic career plan or whatever it is, you've got that one spot and all the details there.
Thank you. Here's our next one. What do you do when your new position turns out to be something different than what you signed up for? And if you knew that it would be like that before you started, you probably wouldn't have accepted the offer.
Yes, so this has happened for clients before, so please know that you're not alone. It does sometimes happen. What you want to think about is make a list first, I would say, just kind of as a starting point here. I would make a list of the things that work and are going to be okay with you, so to speak, even if it's a change about the job. And then make a list of those things that are not working and you're really concerned about and you'd like to try to make an adjustment. And then with those items, if those are things that you can talk with either HR about or your supervisor about over time, maybe not all at once, if it's a possibility for you to change and shift and kind of redirect your position over time, even if it's in the first year, I'm not saying this is going to happen overnight necessarily, but I would try to see if you can do that and if there's a way to adjust kind of your responsibilities and tasks over time. And if you try that out for the first 90 days or the first, 6 months, and you're just not making any traction, at that point, it may be that you want to say, I need to look for something else, unfortunately. Okay. So see what you can do a little bit on your own to kind of do things a little bit differently or make some shifts. And then if not, talk to your supervisor or HR. And if that's just not going to be possible, then it may be that you need to do something different. That's kind of my best, broadest advice, not knowing further details and talking to you more. Hopefully that helps as a start.
Great, and the questions just keep flowing in here, Hallie. So we've got someone who is moving to a new role within their organization. So they're known to several new colleagues based on their prior role. Do you have tips for navigating this, how things might be new and different to an extent, but also managing relationships given that you might have a reputation with people already?
Sure. So the good thing is, right, that you already have a reputation. Hopefully it's a positive one. I'm sure that it is. And I would see that as an asset, that you can leverage those to get things done and to make things, progress forward faster, ask people questions, et cetera, et cetera. But realize too that because you are in a new position, that those relationships are going to change in some way. So there may be things that you can't ask as much and you need to navigate that. I would have an open conversation with them and just be willing to talk through, and kind of use the tagline, so to speak, of, given my new role, I wasn't sure if this was appropriate. Or this was, so hey, please be honest with me if we need to change or adjust something. So just put that kind of disclaimer out on the table so that they know that you're aware that things may need to adjust a little bit too.
Great, and here's a unique situation on something that might be relevant to people who are working in like the gig economy. There are a lot of folks working on contract and who only have a short amount of time to make an impact. Do you have any advice for those folks, especially people who might be working for less than 90 days at an organization?
Sure. So if that's the case, we still want you to do a little bit of the listening, but if you only have a very short period of time, you need to get into action obviously sooner. And what I would guess, if this is the case as well, that they're hiring you as an expert. So I would err on the side of being much more consultative than we talked about today, in order to outline, okay, here are the steps that I think we need to take, what's the plan, and be willing to present something to whomever it is appropriate to do so pretty early on. So you need to do a lot of your homework and research up front, still talking to the right people and asking the right questions, but be ready to present a plan of action pretty quickly as soon as possible within, the first month or whatever seems reasonable for you, so that you are able to make that impact and hit the ground running a little bit faster. Great question.
Great, and I think we have time for 2 more questions. So here's one. How soon is it too soon to begin goal setting and thinking about next steps for me and discussing those with my manager?
In terms of your new job and promotion, everything else, I would give it, maybe like, I think it depends on the job. Okay, so I'm going to give kind of a broad, generic answer. It depends on how often, people tend to get promoted there, et cetera, et cetera. But, between the first 6 or 8 months, I would be willing to, talk with them about, hey, how are things going? Like, just wanted to make sure that I'm learning the right things and doing what I need to do to make the right impact here, and be successful in the long run. And that doesn't mean, that you're necessarily bringing up, hey, I want a promotion tomorrow, but just having that conversation and letting them know that you are thinking in that way and that you want to solicit and have that feedback on a regular basis in order to move up. That's totally fine to do within that period of time.
Great, and then we'll round out here with one more question. We've got a couple questions coming in about mentors, so I'll kind of squish them into one. So first of all, if you're in a high-level position, is it realistic or desirable to find an internal mentor? And then 2, once you have a mentor, or maybe you had in previous jobs, how do you keep in contact with former mentors? And is it best practice to continue asking for recommendations from them over and over again?
Sure. So if you are higher up, if there is someone internally that you can tap, great. But, it's for lack of a better word, the pickings are more slim, as you move higher up. So totally acceptable. And I would encourage it to find someone outside of the organization instead. And then for former mentors, I have found with clients that usually if the mentor was just someone that you became really close with and was very interested in your success and everything else, usually they're perfectly happy to provide advice and continue to do so. But what I would do is before asking them, or at the same breath, just say, hey, I just wanted to touch base with you. Do you mind if I still ask you questions periodically? And try to, fade them out of that role a little bit more, though, and leverage the new, most current mentor for the most part, because they may want to be, going and doing something else too. Again, it kind of depends on the relationship that you have with them. But I hope that helps us to start.
That's great. Well, thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions. We're excited to be able to personalize this content and make sure that we're meeting your needs. And a big, special thank you to you, Hallie, for giving us some great actionable tips on this really important topic.
You are very welcome. It's my pleasure. I pulled up my contact info just so people have it in case they have more questions. Please stay safe and healthy, everyone.